so happy that Alexandra has accepted to join us. I met Alexandra in the Thinkers 50 world. She's one of they call it like the future thought leader world, like one of the highest potential. I don't really recall the right name, but she has done so much. She has worked and written for the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. I love the topic that she addresses about employees and the future of work. And I'm sure we do have a lot of things to learn and think about how can we adapt ourselves to what's happening in the next generations. And I think it's closely related to what we do in terms of projects, the project economy. So without much ado, I think everybody has seen your impressive bio, Alexandra. And yeah, welcome. And do you want to share a few thoughts to start with? And then you'll see it's very interactive. Everybody has lots of questions. We will not get bored and it will pass by very quickly.
Sure. Well, hi, everybody. First of all, I'm just very curious as to how many countries we have represented in our group of about 45 here. It sounded to me, I think I heard when we were doing the introductions, it sounded like there were at least 10. Mm-hmm. But I'm curious, I don't know if we have an exact number, Antonio, but it might be.
Can you type it? Yes, please. Can everybody type where they're calling from?
I guess into the chat function. Yeah, we've got India and France, Brazil, Canada, Belgium, Spain, South Africa, Caracas, wow, UK, Lebanon. So it's more than 10. I think we see 20 already here. So
Mexico, Montevideo, US. So yeah, it's very global.
Yeah, that is wonderful. Well, thank you all for taking the time. I know it's depending on where you are, it might be a different time. It might not be first thing in the morning like it is for me. So I appreciate you taking time out of your day. As Antonio mentioned, my name is Alexandra Levit. I'm a human capital futurist. And what that basically means is not that I have a crystal ball, but that I try to look at patterns that are percolating up through the market and determining what has the greatest potential to cause disruption. So it's not that we know exactly what's going to happen, but given the scenarios that we are privy to and the things that we are seeing, what do we think is most likely to happen? And what do we need to do specifically to prepare for those likely outcomes? And I love to tell the story of how I became a futurist, or at least how I became interested in the future, because it actually goes way back to 1988 when I was a kid growing up outside of Washington, D.C. My dad and I were really into science fiction. I was into the Ender's Game series. My dad was more partial to Star Trek. And we lived very close to the headquarters at the time of the World Future Society. And we had seen a newspaper article about how they had an exhibit where they were predicting what technologies would be hot around 2020. And so my dad and I really wanted to take a tour and see this exhibit. And we went, and I'll never forget this one technology. It was called interactive television. And the idea is that it would be a single device, and you would push a button, and instantaneously you would be able to hear the song you had been waiting all day for the radio to play. So for me, that was Madonna at the time. You could instantly hear Madonna, or you could push another button and you would get to hear the Cosby Show episode that you had missed on Thursday. That was, at the time, the hottest show, at least on American television. And I was absolutely fascinated. And if you think about it, this interactive television back in 1988 was the precursor to a very, very familiar technology that we all have within a foot of our person right now, the smartphone. And that's when I became hooked. And I knew that sometime in my career, I didn't know when it was going to be, I was going to be part of shaping these ideas around what we could see with technology and how it would interact with other aspects of society. And it came back about 20 years later when I started getting asked, as someone who was proficient in human resources and project management, where did I see things going? In particular, there was a new generation in town at the time called the millennials. There are probably some of you on here now born after 1980. And the millennials were doing things a little bit differently. And I was getting asked, what did I see the impact of the millennial generation being in the workforce? And then later I started getting asked, what did I see the impact of artificial general intelligence or automation on the workforce? And so I finally got to bring my experience and my joy in thinking about the future full circle to the area of HR and project management, and then coming back around in terms of what we see happening. Now, obviously COVID, I don't want to spend the whole time just talking myself. I hope we'll engage in a discussion here, but COVID has presented some really interesting workforce related challenges. And I encourage us as professionals to think about these challenges, not just in terms of their impact on the workforce, but on their impact on society in general. And I'll give you an example. Like the biggest thing we're obviously seeing is the rise of the distributed workforce. So people are very much not going into a physical workspace, mainly for safety reasons. And so you have organizations realizing, well, why do I really need to have an in-person workspace? Is that really necessary? It costs a lot of money, there's a lot of liability, and everyone can be just as productive working from home. Well, that has implications on a larger societal level. What are going to happen to our cities when we do that? And so when we talk about these issues, I just encourage us to think not just in the very narrow area of our expertise, be it project management or human resources or workforce, but when we make these changes, when we see these things occurring, we have to think about the bigger picture. What are the larger implications of some of the things that we see happening? So distributed work, of course, is something that we are all now very familiar with. Technology has made that an amazing possibility that 25 years ago we wouldn't have been able to do. And so we see that really work is continuing on for professionals, at least, much as it did before. But one of the things that's interesting is sort of the mechanics behind this. So just because we're able to use technology to do something doesn't mean that we have the best practices down, doesn't mean that we have the ability to do it as productively and efficiently and as intelligently as we need to. And so that's the other thing I want everyone to consider, is not just the fact that technology can do something, but should we be using technology to do something? And if we are going to be using it, what are some ways we can facilitate the best use of that technology to really augment the human capabilities that we've all realized are critically essential? So that's just my intro there. Antonio, I don't know, do we want to just engage in some questions or a discussion? What do you think would be the best way to make use of everyone's time today?
Well, the usual flow is, I have a few questions, Alexandra, and then I'll just open up for everybody. I think it's a topic that most of us are interested. So if I can start, Alexandra, I loved how you started, because one of my first question is always, what did you want to do when you were at high school? And is this what you're doing now? It seems so.
Yeah, no, that's definitely part of it. And also one thing that I didn't mention in that intro is that I wanted to be a writer. So at the time, I thought I would write science fiction. I had written a story about when I was early in high school, at 14 years old, I'd written a story about people who had needed to escape the Earth due to the ozone layer. At the time, that was the big concern, that the ozone layer would be eliminated and you would need to escape to another planet. And so that was what I thought I was going to do. And eventually I started writing about human capital issues. And then again, I was able to, with the latest book, Humanity Works, Merging People and Technologies for the Workplace of the Future. That was a book that kind of tied in my interest in science fiction with my interest in human capital.
I've read your book. What would be the one or two things that you want to highlight from the book, that maybe nice story or tools that you develop in your book, which I found fascinating?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the key takeaway from the book, from my perspective, is that we don't need to worry that humans are going to be unemployed. That is something that I heard over and over again, especially prior to COVID. The machines were coming, they were going to take our jobs, it was going to be a disaster, and we would all be sitting around on our couches watching as the machines took over the world. And in fact, that is not what I've ever been concerned about. My concern with people and technologies and the impact automation is going to have is not that people aren't going to have jobs, it's that people aren't prepared for the jobs that they're going to need to have. So there's a couple of things we see happening when we see automation or machine learning or algorithms integrated into any human-driven process. You still need humans there to design the role of the machine, to oversee it, to fix it when it breaks, and to figure out how to redeploy it. So that's a lot of people that are involved in the machine participation as a result of the integration of that. So that's still people. Also, you need people to be what I call the explainers. And I talk about this in the book, where there are a lot of leaders and constituents out there who don't understand the role that the machine is playing and don't necessarily trust it. They don't trust the data, they don't trust the insights. And so you need humans to be able to apply our unique intuition, our unique judgment, our sense of ethics, to be able to translate the value that the machine is bringing to the table, because the machine doesn't have the ability to do that itself. It requires human participation. So that's a long way of saying that machines are really meant to augment human roles, not necessarily replace them. And I don't think we're really going to see complete and total replacement of many jobs at all, at least in the next 10 to 15 years. Now, when artificial general intelligence takes over, which I think we'll see in the 2030s, that's a little bit of a different ballgame. But for now, I think we can focus on the need to prepare people for changing jobs. We see that on a very limited scale now with distributed work. We see people who've never had to do this before. They've never had to work remotely, suddenly thrust into the situation that they're not prepared for. And that's where my concern is. My concern is that people will have to have jobs they don't know how to do and psychologically aren't able to cope with. They're also going to have jobs in many cases that are not full-time. We're seeing the rise of the contract workforce, where people are going to have to sing for their supper. And a lot of us work that way, but the majority of the global working population has never had to do this. And so giving people the skills, we call it reskilling and upskilling. Reskilling means training people for a different job. Upskilling means giving them additional abilities and competencies in their current job or in their current industry. That is what we need to see happening. And that is where I worry that we don't have quite the right processes in place. And so Humanity Works talks all about this. It talks about, as a leader, as a manager, how do you make this work for your people, and how do you prepare your people for a world that will become increasingly but not totally automated?
Nice, thank you. There two questions come from what you said, Alexandra. How is going to look the organization of the future? And maybe a bit different angle, but what's the incentive for organizations to invest in reskilling and re-educating workers when they are in the late 40s and when you can find cheaper labor? They're very different questions, but I just throw them there. Just answer the one you prefer first.
Yeah, no, Antonio, that's a great question. And there's actually a really interesting report that was done in 2019 by the World Economic Forum that clearly lays out the business case for reskilling and upskilling. So if you haven't seen that, I encourage you to check it out, because it is one of those issues where we tend to think, oh, this would be nice to do, but it's really not going to help us that much. Why don't we just hire new people who have those skills? And as you say, why don't we hire younger people who are cheaper? And I think what we are minimizing there is the value of institutional knowledge. And the fact is, when you're in your 40s or in your 50s, you've seen a lot. You've seen a lot of disruption. You've seen how your organization and your industry handles different challenges. You've seen what works and what doesn't. And most importantly, I would say, I do a lot of generational work as well. I would say that people who are a little bit older have a lot of the interpersonal and attentional skills that the younger generation seems to lack. Now, this isn't due to any intrinsic flaw that this generation have. It's just that they've been raised on technology. And as digital natives, they haven't had a lot of expertise and experience in, let's say, solving a conflict with someone face to face. If they've got a problem with someone, they'll just text them. They don't understand the nuances of how things work, office politics that even might not be in an office. And they don't really have the ability, this has been shown in research, to focus on a very intense task that requires a lot of brain power for very long. Inevitably, they will switch around to something else. So there are a lot of things that more tenured, seasoned employees bring to the table that the younger generation hasn't had the opportunity to develop yet. And so just because they're cheaper and just because they might be good with technology on the surface does not necessarily mean they make the better employee. And so I really encourage all organizations to think carefully about their mix of workers. Another thing that I'm really excited about, I talk about in the book, is called the rise of the swarm team. Now, I didn't invent the term swarm team, that's a Gartner term, but it means that you tap talent from a variety of different sources. And since we're such a global group, I think that global aspect is really important to focus on, that you can tap people from anywhere in the world. You don't have to have them close to your geographic location. You can tap them from all generations, all different types of experience. And you can see, research has borne this out, that when you have these diverse short-term teams, they're much more innovative, they're much more capable of solving problems quickly, and they're much better able to achieve business objectives that are very targeted. So for those of us that are project managers, this is kind of a new way. Some of us are doing it already this way, but on a wide scale, this is something that we are seeing more and more mainstream. So these short-term swarm teams coming together to solve a specific business problem, and then they disband. But the benefit of having people from all generations, all nationalities, all ethnicities, bringing their different points of view and their perspectives to the table is invaluable, and it's something that technology makes possible for us.
Nice, I like that. And I'll make a point a bit later related. I want to start opening the door to our friends. James, can you come up and ask the question to Alexandra, and then I'll pass it to Alfonso. And tell us where you're calling from.
I'm sorry for everybody who's typing into the chat function that I can't read as fast
I'll take care.
I talk. I'm sorry. I promise to read it all.
No, I'll take care.
Thank you, Antonio. Hi, Alexandra. I'm from London, so UK. I'm interested to know whether you think technology drives behavior or whether behavior drives technology.
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think it goes in both directions. That probably is not that surprising of an answer. But I do think that one of the things that, and again, this goes to what I said in the beginning about the big picture implications of things that we are developing, things that we're rolling out. I think one of the problems with technologies is that it's designed by humans, and it's designed with human frailties and human biases in mind. And so we have to be careful about thinking that because something is technology based, that's entirely objective, and that it can tell us what to do and tell us the right way to proceed, because that's not necessarily the case. And I think that's a blind spot for humanity right now, especially given that the majority of technology is developed by Caucasian English-speaking men between the ages of 25 and 35.
Oh, I'm okay. I'm okay.
Right. So, I mean, not to say that perspective isn't valuable. It absolutely is, and these are brilliant developers. But we are missing something when we aren't able to tap into kind of the wider world. And I don't know what everybody else thinks about that. And James, I know there's a variety of ways I could have taken your question, but that's something that has been kind of weighing heavily on me lately, as we're starting to rely more and more on algorithms that were programmed by a very specific group of humans.
Very specific. Good point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, James. Alfonso, your question on projects.
Thank you, Alexandra, for your talk and for being with us today. As a project manager, I always obviously need to motivate people when managing a project. I mean, team members and stakeholders and so on. And it has been always a challenge for me just to motivate people working physically. But now we need to do it virtually. Okay, so the thing is just I have seen, and in fact there is a paradigm on this type of change, regarding the type of behavior that you as a leader need to do. What is your vision about that? any particular thoughts about how companies and professionals should be getting prepared to face up?
Alfonso, that's a great question. And it probably won't surprise any of you that I'm going to zero in on the people-centered aspect. This was always important. It's not like this is news to us, that we need to be empathetic leaders. We need to be transparent leaders. We need to show that we are human beings that are struggling in the same ways that our employees are struggling. And that has become even more critically important for two reasons. A, everybody really is struggling than they were before. We've got all sorts of situations happening. There are health crises, obviously, but then there are also the secondary implications of people who have jobs, but also have kids that have been at home for the last 4.5 months. And it's starting to wear on them. They have aging parents they have to worry about. Maybe their salary has been cut or they've been furloughed. So people are under a level of stress that is absolutely unprecedented, at least in our lifetime. So as a leader, being able to connect with people and show that you're facing some of the same things, that you understand what you're going through, that you want to help them whenever possible, really breaking that barrier between the personal and professional world that used to exist. So it used to be inappropriate for a manager to ask an employee about their personal life. Well, I think we're seeing those boundaries kind of go away now, and that's probably something that as a leader you're going to be expected to do. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is transparency. It's just being available, being accessible, and reporting information that is as accurate as you can, as fast as you can. If you hear something coming from the top, that you are sharing it really readily with your employees, because what we're seeing happening is when we're not physically together, the communication just becomes less frequent. You don't run into people in the elevator. If you don't have a project that you're working on with them or a task that's not due, you might not talk to people for weeks or see them for weeks. And then people start to feel very isolated. They start to feel out of the loop. They might start to feel like they don't trust what's happening with the organization. And so as a leader, the onus is really on you to really continue that communication on a much more frequent basis with everyone on your team than you normally would. So it's the two factors there. You want to be more empathetic and more concerned about their well-being. And also you just want it to be more frequent. You want the touch points. And again, this is an area where technology can help us a lot because collaboration software is so good with this, but just reminding yourselves and everybody on your team that the communication has to be more often and more purposeful. We need to not just be contacting someone when we need something or when a task is due, but just because we want to keep that connection and that rapport intact, because as humans, we're social creatures, right? So just doing work on our own, it can be productive, but it's not necessarily as rewarding.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question, and then I'll pass it to Andre and Didier. Alexandra, what would be the role of HR in this new world? How, are they going to have a bigger role, or they will disappear? Or it's an area I know you know very well. So, what's the role going to look like, and how is it going to evolve?
Now, for those of you who are HR or HR adjacent, as I like to say, so you're interested in HR, you work with HR. The good news is the move that we've been seeing for probably about the last 20 years, from HR being a very transactional, functional group that was fairly siloed from everybody else. HR has been asking for that quote unquote seat at the table for 2 decades now. And finally, we see a compelling reason for everyone else to take that seriously. So the way that I see HR moving is HR not being necessarily its own entity, that it is fully integrated into business operations at the highest level. So human capital is considered to be one of the most strategic imperatives that exists, and that at the C-suite level, those decisions are being made, technology is being implemented from the perspective not, oh, we need a payroll system, but we need a system that's going to manage our employee life cycle from recruitment and talent acquisition, through employer branding, through onboarding, performance management, learning, and even transitions. And that we need to think of our talent in a much broader way, because our people are what drive our business, and our talent needs are directly correlated with our business needs as a whole. So being able to prioritize your business needs and then say, okay, well, what human capital decisions do I need to make that are going to address those priorities? So that's how I see it going. In some organizations, it's moving faster than others, but I do think that COVID has accelerated it, because that obviously became the thing that was on fire. It's like, what are we going to do with our people? How are we going to manage our workforce? And we even see, I've been doing a lot of, I'd be curious to know if anybody's in a retail organization, but I've been doing some research in that world, and how we manage a retail workforce that in many cases has to be on site. They're essential workers. They are in the physical space. They are hourly workers in many respects, so they don't necessarily have the same motivations or have the same concerns as full-time professional employees. And it's still a challenge. So looking at it from a variety of different angles, which I think is everyone can probably gather by now, is something that I like to do.
Thank you, Alexandra. I'm passing on to Andre in Brazil, and then Didier in Italy. I like that you keep the question sharp. I think we're becoming very good at that. So go ahead, Andre.
Hi, Andre.
Hi.
We can't see where you are.
I'm Brazil.
Okay, I've got like 30 people on the screen right now, but you're not one of them. So I need to... Oh, here I see you. Okay, there you are. Hi.
So, as you a share of the workforce move to maybe for smaller cities, it's a possibility as you'll be able to work remotely. What do you think about education and healthcare? They are going to move with them, or I especially regarding education, what do you think is going to happen with education?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I have to say, we talked about the things that keep me up at night at the beginning, and education, at least from the perspective of K through 12, is concerning to me. And the reason that it's concerning is there are a couple of reasons to explore. First of all, is some of the more obvious things that are happening, at least here in Chicago, which is where I'm calling in from. We see that there is a huge socioeconomic discrepancy with what is available to kids, depending on their background and their current socioeconomic status. And we see that the more that we move to remote education, the further behind these kids are left. And I don't really know what the answer to that is. I think that remote learning is absolutely possible. Clearly, we have the technology, but you're going to see the gap widen. And that is something that is, I think, potentially catastrophic. And so hopefully we're going to be able to send some kids back to school, at least sometime in the near future, so that we don't see those gaps widen, because I think that that's not ideal. The other thing is the psychological aspect of having K through 12 or even college kids be fully remote. They're not getting the socialization. They're not getting the experience that you have by growing up and having your maturity shaped by being around other people. And I see that too as being very potentially damaging. And that's not even a socioeconomic thing. That's just a general human psychology thing. So what I am hoping very, very strongly is that we're able to get a vaccine quickly enough, and we're able to put processes and procedures in place so that when we have if we have another pandemic, we're able to avoid having kids be learning in their homes for months and months at a time. Because again, technology exists. You can do Zoom meetings like this. You can complete assignments. You can watch videos. It's possible. But we know that a hybrid approach to learning, having a mix of in-person and virtual learning, a mix of instructor-led learning and student-led learning, is the best approach. And so my concern is that current circumstances are going to force us to be further in one direction than perhaps is best. And I don't know if you have more specific questions about education in a given area, but I would say that when you mention the word education, that's my biggest red flag at the moment. And I'm just praying for the best to get those kids out of their homes and learning in more diverse environments as soon as possible.
Just another question regarding, you said earlier about the younger workforce. and the seniors. I think most the younger are specialists, and when you get older, you become more generalist. I think you have to have a balance of both of them.
Yes.
In the companies.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And individuals need to have a balance even within themselves. You need to, I think that the word agility has been a buzzword for about the last 5 years or so. And I know Antonio in his work talks a lot about agility, and it's essential to have a core skill set, but to be able to move relatively seamlessly into another area as business dictates. And one of the cooler things that I've seen happening as a result of COVID is organizations that, instead of just laying off large swaths of their employee population, they said, well, we've got certain groups in our organization that are really busy and certain groups that aren't. So is it possible for us to move the people who aren't busy into the areas where we need a lot more help? Well, in order to do that, people have to be pretty agile. They have to have a core skill set that allows them to relatively quickly master either a new function or a new industry or an adjacent area that maybe they don't have much experience with. And so I think that within every individual, you have to have kind of this core area of expertise, of course, something that you were trained in, something that you have a lot of hard skills associated with. But you also need to have the ability and the drive. Again, this goes back to whether people are prepared or not for the workforce of the future. You have to have the drive to be able to say, all right, I might be 55, but I don't mind trying something new. I don't mind using my skills and parlaying it into an area that needs more help, even though that's typically not where I have worked. And that's a mindset. And I think that the concern with the older generation is that they don't have that mindset because they've never had to work with that mindset. But I don't think it's impossible, clearly. It's just a matter of, on an individual level, you've got to make that commitment to continuous learning, even though you might not have had to do that in the past. Great question.
Thank you. Didier?
Yes, thank you for your presentation. You've already probably answered a good part of my concerns, which are linked to the gap, the accelerating gap between the level of education, of capacity, human capacity to stay behind the acceleration of the technology we are seeing today. There are huge opportunities. I'm directly involved with technology, with empathy in technology, and whatsoever you want. But my main concerns, and you sharing it, it's the fact that we are facing increasing social and political tensions. We all know that fake news are manipulating a huge part of the globe and the population. So I don't know what is your further concern about that, or if you have some answer. I would like to be very optimistic about technology. The problem is human, and the problem is that we have, I'm seeing that in Italy in particular, that the level of education is slowing down. Italy has lost a lot of university students over the last 20-25 years. All the good students, the brains are flying away from Italy, moving to the US, to France, to Denmark, everywhere else, because the lack of capacity of the country and of the political population to keep them here. And I think this is a problem in Italy, but it is a problem in many countries.
Yeah, and I like to be optimistic too. And I would say the plus side of that is because we see a lot more organizations embracing global talent pools. So you may actually be able to hold on to your Italian citizens, and they might be working somewhere else. Now, of course, this has tax implications, but at least they're participating in society, as opposed to leaving the US. And then because we see the rise of the contract workforce, maybe they'll be working for some US companies, but maybe they'll be working for some Italian companies as well. So I think that the benefit of this more fluid workforce is that even if the opportunities are not exclusively in your home country, you can still hold on to people and maybe have them contributing on a societal level, maybe on a governmental level, and possibly on a commercial level as well, depending on like what's the mix of jobs that they've decided to engage in. It's not as black and white as, let's say, well, you know, I can't get a job in Italy, so I'm going to move to the United States and live there for the rest of my life and have only employment in the United States. So I'm hopeful that we'll at least be able to see some of that less like mass migration happening, and we'll be able to hold on to our citizens. I don't know if that's answering your question or that's helpful to the discussion, but when you were talking, that's kind of what came up for me.
It's a huge discussion, of course, but thank you for your
Thank you for the question, Didier. I will pass now. Manuel is commenting more than a question, that projects are heavily relying on people, and that's why he likes, and we like, I think, the profession of projects is there's no projects without people. So that's, I think, a very good statement. Ian is putting a question here. Ian, you want to come up on screen, and then I'll pass it to Rowaida as well.
Yes. Hi, thank you very much for the presentation so far. Excellent. The question is, over the next 10 years, what skills do you believe will actually be in demand? From today, what skills are going to be short?
It's so funny, like you're right next to me on the screen. Like I've got Antonio, and then it's me, and that's Ian. So like, oh, hi Ian. So the first way that I want to answer this is I want to introduce the concept of what are called applied technology skills. And applied technology skills, that essentially means you are able to use people, processes, data, and devices together to make better business decisions and do your job more efficiently. So that's a long way of saying that you don't necessarily need to know how to code, but you do need to know that software is available that can code for you. So my favorite example is application development. In the old days, you would need IT to develop an application, and I know this is adjacent to many of you in project management. You would need IT to develop an app if you needed something specific for your business to track sales or customers or projects going through the pipeline. And now you don't necessarily need to ask IT to do that. If you've got applied technology skills, you realize that there is low code and no code software available that can allow you to create your own application relatively quickly. So having applied technology skills means you have the knowledge to know what technology is out there that can help you do your job. What's the most strategic and appropriate way to use automation? Not just, okay, well, we're gonna fire all these people and automate this because we can, but where are the areas that we should add humans? Where are the areas that we should add machines? And how should they most effectively work together? So this is the area of skill that is going to become increasingly important. And here's the thing, it's not just important for leaders or people in a given industry. If you work in the professional world, and even to some degree if you don't, you have to have these skills. Everyone has to have them. And yet, unless you were trained in IT, you probably don't. So it's the area where we see the biggest deficit, not because, again, of any internal flaw of people, but just that it's not something that was typically taught in an educational environment. So it's something that we have to be responsible for as leaders in upskilling our basically entire employee population in these applied technology skills and what is necessary to identify in each particular function or subject area. So that's the one thing. I would also encourage people to think, and this won't be a surprise to anyone, to think about these skills that make us uniquely human. The things that we can bring to the table that machines are not capable of offering. Now, when I talk about machines, I'm talking about current machine capabilities. I'm not talking about 25 years down the line when we could potentially see artificial general intelligence and machines capable of a lot more. But right now, we have humans capable of things like empathy, judgment, intuition, creativity, problem solving, And these are all things that we bring to the table that machines aren't capable of. And I'll give you all my favorite example ever from the last couple of years. You might recall that there was a huge scandal. It was actually here in Chicago, and it was United Airlines. And the deal is that the algorithm told the staff at O'Hare Airport that they needed to pull 2 passengers off the plane so that flight attendants could get to New York to make a flight that they were supposed to staff. Well, the algorithm told them, this is what's best for business. This is how we make money. So everybody, make it happen. And you had a bunch of human employees just kind of standing by and saying, well, the algorithm told us that this was good for business, so we better do it. And you had no one thinking through the reputational aspects of this decision, the ethical implications of this decision. And as a result, because the machine wasn't thinking about this, you saw a very, very problematic scenario that is still reverberating in United Airlines to this day. They're still answering questions. They're still dealing with lawsuits because they pulled a guy off the plane. It ended up being violent, and it ended up being broadcast across the world. So the lesson here is, it's still my favorite example, even though it's a couple years old, because this is where an algorithm was put in charge. There wasn't appropriate oversight. You need humans to be the safeguarding things like ethics, things like making good judgment calls. It's not always about just clearly the bottom line. And even if it is, sometimes the bottom line is not the most important thing to be weighted. And so that is why humans are going to be needed. And that's why humans need to continue to hone these skills. And for those of us in technology who've rested on our laurels of, we have coding skills, we have app dev skills, we only need these technical skills because no one else has them, and we don't have to develop our soft skills, those days are over. The people who are going to be the most vulnerable to automation are going to be the tech professionals. And so those are the people I'm most concerned about, and those are the people I would encourage to really start honing those creativity, judgment, intuition, problem-solving skills.
Thank you. Lovely answer. I will say to you, when I was at school, they just introduced the calculator. So all technology I've learned during my career, and I love the approach of saying it's how it's applied.
Yeah.
And that will all be controlled by humans.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. It's a great example of the calculator, right? You know it can be used, so how do you use it?
Okay. Thank you, Antonio.
Thank you for the question. We're going to Rovaida, where you're calling from, and Saif. In the meantime, I've done a bit of research for my next book. There's 2 quite interesting research points I found. There is like saying that the generalist, remember, over the past 30 years, we've always heard you need to specialize in one thing, and that will propel you in your career. It seems that the future is more what you're saying, Alexander, is knowing how to adapt in a complex environment with different challenges all the time, and being able to understand, connecting the dots, not making the dots, but connecting the dots. The second one comes from LinkedIn and Microsoft. They've researched the top 10 skills or professions of the next 10 years. And the good news is project managers is one of those, which is kind of related to the generalist research. So I will be sharing that in the email with the recording of this session.
Great.
Yeah, nice.
So, hi everyone.
Hi, Rowaida.
This is Rowaida from Bahrain.
Hi, Bahrain.
Hi.
Thank you, Antonio, and thank you, Alex, for this nice meeting, as always. My question is related to movies. We all see science fiction movies about AI, and their intuition about the future is they are always going to be horrible AI machines controlling everyone and controlling every country and make war everywhere. Is this something we can say a future as well? Because we saw this movie Contagion. It was about COVID-19. So
pretty much it was, wasn't it?
Exactly. So they kind of predict future somehow. Are the other movies, are they predicting our future regarding this new technology and all of that, AI, science fiction and everything?
I mean, I think that it is a legitimate possibility that artificial general intelligence will lead to artificial superintelligence, which will render machines more intelligent and more capable than human beings, and they'll be able to do things probably that we can't even dream of. This is definitely coming down the pike. I think people think it's going to happen faster than I think that this is going to happen not as quickly as we are thinking. I mean, this is probably more like 25 years into the future where we start to see this super intelligence really having a significant and profound impact on human activities, and them even potentially having like a leadership role. I think that there are a couple things that we need to think about today that can help us go down the right path here. First of all, is artificial intelligence needs to have significantly more oversight in terms of its development. Right now we see actually I don't know if we have any people from China on here now, but in China, they're actually accelerating their development of AI quite significantly. And the reason that they're able to do this is because they're able to test AI on an extremely large population that has given up a lot of personal freedoms. And so they are rapidly expanding, and there's really very little regulation. There's very little oversight, essentially. And so I think that's where we could potentially get into trouble, is that this stuff is developing at a clip where we just don't have guardrails around it. And as project managers, you guys know the importance of guardrails and having a process where things are going to not get out of control, but happen in a way that will result in an outcome that we think is desirable. And so the short answer to your question is, yes, it absolutely could happen. It probably will happen, but there are steps we can take today in terms of government and private industry regulation that can keep this going in a way that will see humans maintain control over it. Because I think that's kind of central to the question you're asking, right? Is, are we going to lose control of this whole situation? And we absolutely could. But it's up to us. We're going to be the ones who birth these smart machines. So if we take the right steps now, and we have a lot of coordination on a global scale, which is, as we've seen with COVID, is a huge challenge. I'm not suggesting it's easy, but that's what's going to be necessary to keep this going in a way that we think is going to result in a positive outcome. Great question.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Alexandra. There's a question here. I'll just drop it from Mark. It's, yes, but humans, they also make mistakes and they have flaws. And how are we going to deal with that? Do you have any views?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, and I have a colleague, Scott Klosowski, here in the US, who talks about the concept of humology, which is the study of understanding where machines can add value and where humans can add value, and deriving the strengths and abilities of each to have the best possible outcome. And so I think understanding that there are areas where machines are going to be better. As you say, Antonio, humans make mistakes. There's human error in a lot of processes. So when you have a large amount of data that you need to analyze, it's just a small example, or you need to do it very quickly, or you need to have kind of an objective output as a result of large data sets, then you're going to want a machine involved probably. You're probably going to want a machine involved in tasks that are very repetitive, that require a lot of concentrated focus over a long period of time. And so it's understanding that that's where you're going to want to insert a machine potentially, and where you have kind of the more nuanced issues where you need someone to take all those insights and say, well, here's why we might want to throw this one out. Here's why this one might not be as appropriate. That's where you need the person who can understand the kind of the hidden implications of some of what might to a machine seem to be pretty straightforward. So that humology is the study of where we can most effectively place machines and where we can most effectively augment the ability of our humans. And I think that's what we're looking to do. It's not replace humans, but augment our natural abilities that, in my mind, I don't see going away anytime soon. We've got to have really this artificial superintelligence, and we don't even know what that's going to look like, to even come close to having a human conscience or being able to weigh ethical issues in the same way that human beings can. Great question.
Thank you. Judy, you had a different question. Judy Miao, can you raise your question? Let me get you. Are you there?
Okay, here we go. This is Judy Miao from United States in New Jersey. Hi there. My question relates to skills inventory, skills development for career development. You know, because we're now remote workers away from a team environment, and how do you assess how to develop people?
Oh, that's a good question. This is an area where I think technology can play a really interesting role. And I always suggest to people right at the start, and this doesn't really necessarily have to do with COVID or remote work, but if you haven't done a skills matrix or a skills assessment of your current workforce, I think that's hugely important to identify, again, going back to the very top of the organization, what are the priorities that we need to focus on and where do we have gaps? And then asking everybody in your workforce to report in on what skills they have and where, not only what skills they have, but what skills would they like to develop and where can they potentially add value, because they have a skill set that maybe they're not using in their everyday responsibilities, but could be useful to those priorities that we've identified. So having a system that can keep track of all of this, can have people reporting in and can crunch the numbers and spit back out, well, here's how you might want to do your succession planning. Here's where you might want to move people around in order to ascertain what you've got and what you need, and then where you need to do those reskilling and upskilling efforts. And the great thing about technology and learning management systems now is that they really facilitate a wide variety of types of learning. And the modern learner is using elements that are very continuous. So you're always going on to the next thing. They're frequent, they're informal. So instead of relying on bringing everyone together in an in-person training environment, you can have people doing individualized plans that are a combination of, we call it blended learning, online learning, and maybe to some degree in person, maybe it's some employer sponsored. The curation of content and curation of learning is something we're seeing a lot of organizations do, recognizing you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to develop a training course on data analytics, for example, online. So it's curating resources for your employees and allowing people to make choices about how they want to reskill and upskill, what things they want to take advantage of, and having everybody kind of on a personalized plan. And the great thing about many current human capital management systems is that they track this for you so that you don't have to manually track what every employee is doing, what skills they're moving toward, and where you see their career going. This is something that the technology absolutely exists right now to make that possible, and in fact, a lot easier for people who are the overseers of that learning.
Yeah, I think there's a great potential for technology here to, just like IBM coming out with chess, how to play chess by using machines. And this is to incorporate all our skills and how our thinking methods, you know, come into play in problem solving. And that will also enhance, you know, machine learning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. We're coming to an end. There's quite a lot of very interesting points. I will share that later on, comments and some questions that we won't be able to answer today. I'll share them with you, Alexandra, maybe if there's a few of them that you can pick up later on. But I want to finish on time. I want to thank you, Alexandra, for making the time in your busy schedule. It has been very eye-opener to look at this new world and new reality with humans and technology getting closer and closer. I just found fascinating the topic, and I'm sure I learned some new things, and I guess the team as well.
You guys are very welcome. And if anyone would like to touch base, find me on LinkedIn. My email is arl@alexandralevit.com. Levit's got 1 T. So I would love to hear from all of you and hear about your experience,
Awesome.
particularly in different nations, because I know it's sometimes our response to COVID and some of these other issues is a culture by culture thing. And I personally am fascinated in learning more about that. So please keep in touch. And thanks again, Antonio, for the wonderful session today.
Thank you, Alexandra. We'll pass on your details, your website. And for the team next week, I would like to have more an update on the working groups next Thursday to have a bit of step back and see where we're going. I also like to have a roundtable one day around projects and the future of project management. There's quite a lot of people from PMI, the board. So these are things that are in my mind. But next Thursday will be working groups update and see where we're doing and the progress and where do we refocus if needed. So thank you again for being here. It's become a classic hour now on Thursday to see you, and I'm very pleased that you can join us. And thank you again, Alexandra. I hope to see you in London for sure next year.
I hope so too.
Yeah.
All our London friends, join us for coffee.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.